You've heard of people who defied death. But what if someone defied what happens after it? In this story, two students decided to prove that an ancient legend was nothing more than superstition. They were certain they would find only an empty coffin, or, at most, a skeleton reduced to dust. What they found at night haunted them for the rest of their lives. And decades later, just when they believed it was all behind them, a new event turned that graveyard intrusion into one of the most disturbing mysteries ever recorded. This is a true story about people who stared death in the face, and never saw the world the same way again. This story begins on a freezing night in 1870. The moon could barely pierce the clouds covering the sky over Malden, a small town in Massachusetts, USA. The streets were practically deserted. The only sound was the boots of two young men echoing on the damp ground as they hurried toward the town's old cemetery. One of them was James Adams, a medical student at Harvard. Beside him was his colleague William, carrying a lantern, unlit to avoid attracting attention. Neither of them was there out of curiosity. They had a very specific goal. They wanted to prove, once and for all, that a story told for decades was nothing more than a fantasy born of popular imagination. Upon reaching the massive iron gate, the two stopped. They looked one way. Then the other. The silence was absolute. Once certain no one was watching, they climbed the gate and jumped to the other side. As soon as their feet hit the ground, they began to run among the graves. The chill of the early morning hours seemed even more intense in that place. With every step, the darkness seemed to swallow the path behind them. After a few minutes, they finally reached their destination. An old brick mausoleum. There lay the mortal remains of a man named Ephraim Gray, who had passed away some 20 years earlier. Or, at least, that was what everyone believed. For years, townspeople had repeated the same story. Ephraim had been an extremely reclusive chemist. Hardly anyone truly knew him. He lived in isolation in a large house and had only one servant. Passers-by would often catch the strong scent of chemicals wafting from the windows. In time, rumors began to circulate. People said Ephraim conducted secret experiments. But these were no ordinary experiments. Legend has it he was trying to create a compound capable of conquering death. A formula to make the human body immortal. When he died, everyone assumed his experiments had failed. But then, something even stranger happened. Ephraim's only employee made an unusual request to the person in charge of the funeral. He insisted that the body not be embalmed. At the time, that seemed completely absurd. When asked why, his answer was even more unsettling. According to him, the elixir hadn't prevented death. But it had prevented decomposition. Ephraim's body would never decay. The story spread quickly. Over the years, it became one of the region's best-known legends. Many laughed. Others believed. The subject was frequently discussed among Harvard medical students. James always treated the story with skepticism. As a medical student, he was well versed in the natural processes of the human body. Not even the best existing preservation techniques could keep a corpse intact for that long. After 20 years, only bones would remain. That is what science said. And that night, he intended to prove that science was right. William lit the lantern. The flame illuminated the mausoleum's heavy door. A thick padlock barred the way in. James knelt down. He discreetly pulled out a small hammer and chisel hidden beneath his coat. Every blow seemed too loud. The two kept pausing their work, convinced someone might have heard. But no one appeared. After a few minutes, the padlock finally gave way. They exchanged a silent glance. It was too late to turn back. James slowly pushed the door open. The rusted hinges let out a long, deep creak. Cold, heavy air escaped from inside the mausoleum. Draped in cobwebs and shrouded in dampness, the space seemed frozen in time. They stepped inside slowly. The lantern's flickering light revealed rows of coffins resting on stone shelves. Each one bore a small identification plaque. In absolute silence, they began to search. Until they found the name they were looking for. Ephraim Gray. They both took a deep breath. They grasped the heavy coffin and carefully lowered it to the floor. William raised the lantern. James placed his hands on the lid. For a few seconds, neither had the courage to go on. Then, slowly, he opened the coffin. And in that instant, everything they thought they knew ceased to make sense. For a moment, neither of them could breathe. The lantern's flame flickered. And the yellowish light revealed something that simply shouldn't exist. Inside the coffin lay the body of Ephraim Gray. Not a skeleton. Not mere remains. A body. His skin remained pale, smooth, and virtually intact. There were no apparent signs of decomposition. His clothes had succumbed to time, reduced to darkened, fragile tatters, but the man resting before them looked merely asleep. His face remained serene. His hands were crossed over his chest. Even the nuances of his expression seemed preserved. James stood completely motionless. All the confidence he had carried upon entering the mausoleum vanished in a matter of seconds. His mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Perhaps it was a trick of the light. Perhaps the cold had preserved the body. Perhaps. But no hypothesis seemed sufficient. William brought the lantern a little closer. The silence became almost unbearable. Then James did something he never imagined he would do. He slowly leaned forward. He wanted to look more closely. The longer he stared, the more impossible it all seemed. The skin lacked the dry, hardened appearance expected of a corpse so old. It looked incredibly preserved. As if time had simply stood still. The two exchanged a glance. Not a word was spoken. It wasn't necessary. They were both thinking the exact same thing. What if the old legend was true? Fear overcame curiosity. James let go of the coffin lid. Together, they slammed it shut. The impact echoed through the mausoleum like a gunshot. Without saying a word, they grabbed the lantern and ran. They stumbled their way out through the narrow corridors. They pushed open the heavy iron door. They crossed the cemetery as fast as they could. They climbed over the gate again. And they only slowed down once they were far away from that place. All the way back, neither of them had the courage to speak about what they had seen. It was as if voicing those words would make it all even more real. In the days that followed, James tried to convince himself that there had to be a scientific explanation. He spent hours in the Harvard Library researching books on anatomy, medicine, chemistry, and cadaver preservation. He read everything he could find. No answer. Nothing explained how a body could remain practically intact after 20 years, without any kind of embalming. At the same time, another fear began to grow. The police had launched an investigation into the break-in at the mausoleum. Desecrating a grave was a crime. If they were found out, James could lose his place in medical school and completely ruin his future. For weeks, every knock on his door made his heart race. Every time someone called his name, he imagined he had finally been discovered. But the days passed. Then came the months. And nothing happened. The investigation went cold. No one showed up to question them. Over time, life returned to normal. James finished medical school. He built a respected career. He opened his own practice in Boston. William went his own way, too. Little by little, that night began to feel like nothing more than a distant memory. A memory both of them preferred to forget. Until, about 30 years later, the past came knocking. It was an ordinary afternoon. James was organizing some documents in his office when he heard 3 sharp knocks. He called out for the person to enter. The door opened slowly. A police officer stood on the other side. The doctor felt a chill run down his spine. For a brief moment, he was that frightened young man running among the graves in Malden all over again. The officer introduced himself calmly. He said he was with the city police department, and that he was investigating a case from 3 decades ago. James didn't even need to ask which one. The color drained from his face. Before he could even try to make up an excuse, the officer said something that made him give up on lying. Several witnesses had already reported that he and William were responsible for breaking into Ephraim Gray's mausoleum. There was no denying it anymore. Taking a deep breath, James decided to tell the whole truth. He explained that he had never intended to steal anything. He had simply wanted to see if the famous legend was true. He recounted how they had opened the coffin, seen the perfectly preserved body, and fled immediately in terror. As he spoke, he hoped the officer would understand his side of the story. But the investigator's expression remained unchanged. When James finished, silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Then, the officer asked a question that made the atmosphere go completely cold. "If you only looked at the body, can you explain to me where it ended up?" James frowned. He didn't understand. The officer continued. The old Malden cemetery was being decommissioned. All the graves were being relocated to another site. When workers opened Ephraim Gray's mausoleum to remove the coffin, they noticed it was strangely light. When they lifted the lid, there was no one inside. The coffin was completely empty. No signs of recent forced entry. No secret passages. No evidence that anyone else had entered the mausoleum since the night James and William had been there. In practical terms, this meant only one thing. The 2 students were the only ones known to have opened that coffin. And now, the body was gone. James insisted he was innocent. William confirmed the exact same story. Both swore they had never touched the corpse. But given the evidence, convincing the police would be nearly impossible. The case eventually joined the list of unsolved mysteries. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Ephraim Gray's body. Was it stolen? Was there a historical error? Or is there an explanation that never came to light? James spent the rest of his life searching for an answer. And he never found one. But there was a question that, from time to time, still crossed his mind. A question he made a point of immediately pushing aside. What if, however impossible it might seem, Ephraim Gray had never actually remained inside that coffin? For centuries, stories like these were dismissed as superstition. Accounts whispered in hushed tones. Notes forgotten in old newspapers. Testimonies that defy all logical explanation. Perhaps there is an answer for each of these events. Perhaps science simply hasn't found them all yet. Or perhaps there are experiences that lie beyond our understanding. James Adams spent his entire life trying to explain the body that refused to decompose. This story offers no absolute proof that something supernatural occurred. Yet, these events were experienced by ordinary people. People who had much to lose by telling what they had seen. And yet, they chose to speak out. Perhaps because some experiences are too heavy to bear in silence. Perhaps because keeping these events to themselves was even more terrifying than sharing them. In the end, it is up to each of us to decide what to believe. Extraordinary coincidences. Psychological phenomena. Misinterpretations. Or evidence of aspects of reality we have yet to comprehend. Whatever the answer, one thing seems inevitable. Death remains humanity's greatest mystery. We spend our lives trying to understand it. We create religions. We develop theories. We build cemeteries, monuments, and memorials. But when someone claims to have witnessed something that seems to defy everything we know, doubt always lingers. And perhaps it is precisely that doubt that makes stories like this so unsettling. Because the moment the impossible seems to unfold before us, the boundary between what we call reality and what we call legend begins to blur. And when that happens, it is impossible not to wonder. Do we truly know the limits of life and death? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear about other real-life cases that defy logic, leave a comment telling us which of the 3 stories affected you the most. Your comment helps others interested in mysteries find this video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable events are the very ones that actually happened. See you in the next video.